So the star of the evening, we want to welcome our school start time members of our school start time committee to come up and present the proposal for a change of school start time for the 2025-2026 school year. I want to welcome the chair of the committee, Principal Keith Boardman, the principal of South High School. We have Principal Dan Wall, the principal of Transit Middle School. We have Director Christine Harding, who is our district medical director, and we have Director Chris Muchika, who is our director of athletics and physical education for our district. We also have a member of the committee in the back, Dr. Chris McGinley, who is here to support his colleagues this evening. I turn it over to Principal Keith Boardman.
Yes, thank you for having us here tonight, even though Mr. Muchika is hiding behind the pillar over here. But yes, we're ready to present. This has been a fairly long process, and I'll go through the timeline when he pulls up when the presentation is pulled up. But it's been about a year and a half process for us, and we're happy to present it tonight finally. So going through.
You want to use this one? Here you go.
All right.
I'm sorry.
Oh, no. Turn the volume up. Okay. Now I've got two, so I'm just going to flip back and forth. There we go. So the timeline for this, actually, we began about a year and a half ago. We actually began talking about it in the summer of 2023. In the fall of 2023 is when we began to put the committee together and really began to pull up a lot of the research that was out there on the material. I want to make sure we recognize the people on the committee. There were 15 of us total on the committee. So there were 6 administrators, 2 from each level, 6 teachers, 2 from each level. Plus we had 3 district office administrators, including Chris Muchika and Christine Harding and Dr. McGinley, all of whom we sort of felt brought a unique perspective. We certainly knew that if we were talking about school start times and end times, we needed to have our athletic director on there, and Christine was able to provide us a lot of information and interpret some of the information, the research out there about mental and physical health. So it's been a nice process. You know, anytime you have a committee like this, it's always kind of an interesting thing because you're digging into a topic that is probably going to make some people happy, make some people unhappy. Anytime change comes, that's something. One of the things I appreciate about all these members of the committee, we began the process by really saying, okay, our job here is to put our personal feelings aside. And that's difficult when you're talking about this because as we're going through and talking about school start times and school end times and those are things that have direct effects on us. And so I really appreciated the people on the committee who were willing to kind of put those personal thoughts and those personal feelings aside and really look at the research. And that is really what has driven this process, is examining the research and ultimately trying to find, first whether a change should be recommended, and then ultimately when we did determine that, really making sure that we're putting students first here and what is best for students. And so I appreciate that a lot. As we went through the fall and winter last year, we were meeting, we were looking at the research and really looking at a lot of different pieces of that. In the summer, we began the process of creating focus groups. We also, this past fall, there were 6 of us who actually attended the National School Start Time Conference in Baltimore. And then finally going through meeting with different focus groups. So we had multiple focus groups as we went through. We had 2 parent focus groups, a teacher focus group, and a student focus group. And many of the members of the committee actually attended those and were there to hear what each of those groups said. And then finally going through, completing our final proposal, which is really a kind of a 2-part structure. Once you've looked at the research for this and you've determined, okay, this is what we want to do, then you begin coming up with, okay, here are some of our parameters that we're really interested in, what the research is telling us we should be looking at, what we want to make sure that we are following. And then you actually get into the next step, which is, okay, but can that be done and how can it be done? And you start really looking at the logistics of those issues. And so this is really a multi-step. And even through, the last few weeks, we've been really examining, breaking down issues, trying to find those things where this is how to do it. the best possible way to make sure that we're meeting all the needs for what we want to do. Obviously, the January was the proposal with the idea of on the timeline, Board of Education vote, and then a lot of information, and that's been something we've been working very carefully with Nick Filipowski, and I want to thank him for all the time he's put into this. Obviously, there was information that we're now presenting now. There is a lot of information that'll be coming out tomorrow for people, and then ultimately, if this is approved, the communication with everybody in the community as we move on.
Well, thank you everybody for having us tonight. We really appreciate this opportunity. Reviewing the research. So let's take a look at the research to better understand the evidence and recommendations that exist to best support our students. Mine works, unlike yours, Keith. All right, reviewing the research, student health and wellness. Based on the scientific evidence, the American Academy of Pediatrics, American Medical Association, and American Academy of Sleep Medicine all endorse a school start time of 8:30 a.m. or later for our secondary students. As you can see, there's a plethora of organizations supporting later start times for our adolescent students. Listed are 8 that were reviewed supporting this recommendation. Such as American Medical Association, American Academy of Pediatrics, American Academy of Sleep Medicine, American Psychological Association, American Academy of Child and Adolescent Psychiatry, Centers for Disease Control, National Parent Teacher Association, and National Education Association. Okay. The American Academy of Pediatrics states that the evidence strongly implies early school start times before 8:30 a.m. as a key modifiable contributor to insufficient sleep in our adolescent population. They also go on to state that a substantial body of research has demonstrated that delaying school start times is an effective countermeasure to chronic sleep loss and has a wide range of potential benefits to students with regard to physical and mental health, safety, and academic achievement. Scientific evidence also tells us that insufficient sleep adversely affects our teens. Further, the AAP recognizes insufficient sleep in adolescents as an important public health issue that significantly affects the health and safety, as well as the academic success of our nation's middle school and high school students, such as poor attendance and increased tardiness, increased depression, anxiety, and suicidal ideation, decreased emotional regulation, increased substance use and abuse, increased motor vehicle crashes, increased risk-taking behavior, decreased concentration and cognitive efficiency, and a decline in academic performance. Optimal sleep for middle school and high school students is between 8.5 and 9.5 hours each night. Teens getting less than 8 hours of sleep per night report significantly higher depression symptoms, greater use of caffeine, and are at greater risk for making poor choices for substance use. I'm going to turn it over to our colleague, Dan Wall, Principal of Transit Middle.
Thank you. Good evening. I'll continue a little bit with a review of the research. So one of the logical questions in the research and that we received in our review is, if you make school start times later, won't the students just stay up later? And it's a reasonable question. And the research says no. The scientific evidence clearly shows that moving the start time later increases the amount of sleep students get. Multiple studies have shown that for every 2 minutes of school start time is moved back, students gain between 1 and 2 minutes of sleep. So the research suggests a closer alignment between biological circadian rhythms and environmental demands on our students. So it's this closer alignment that helps students access more quality sleep. Coinciding with the benefits of more sleep, multiple studies show that schools with later start times see better overall attendance to school, as well as a marked decrease, as much as 400%, in the number of tardies to first period class. So oversleeping or my child needed to catch up on sleep is a common excuse we see in our tenants' offices. Regarding the academic benefits, districts who have moved to later school start times have seen an increase in graduation rates in their high school students. Students with increased sleep report fewer incidents of impaired executive functioning. So this is to say students experiencing more routine sleep can better access their working memory, attend to planning and organization, problem solve, manage their time better, and persevere through challenges. These are many of the skills that parents and educators work to build in their formative years and that we hope to see applied more independently during the high school years. So the last finding we wanted to highlight relates to the economically disadvantaged students. The magnitude of the positive effects of the later school start time on academic outcomes is larger for economically disadvantaged students, including higher course grades, higher achievement on test scores, reduced tardies, improved attendance, and reduced suspensions. I'll turn it over to Mr. Boardman with our recommendation for proposals.
So for the last 2 weeks, I've had people in my building just walk by me and throw times out, seeing if if I'll reveal anything. We want to make sure that everybody at least gets an understanding of what times we chose and why we did. So the proposed start and end times beginning for next year, if that's the choice, really what it comes down to, elementary is going to shift to an earlier slot. So elementary schools, and we've kept we did explore at one point actually moving all 6 elementary schools to the same time, but that wasn't feasible in terms of how we were going to do this. So the 4 elementary schools that currently go at the same time, Dodge, Forest, Heim, and Maple East, their time will be 7:50 a.m. to 2 p.m. The other 2 elementary schools, which have traditionally been different times already, will be 8:20 to 2:30. They're sort of in line in the morning with the middle schools like they are now. The middle schools will be 8:20 to 3 p.m. But if you look at the elementary and the middle schools, they're really kind of moving the start time back about a half hour, and then the end times are a little bit different. And then at high school, we see probably the most significant change. High school would begin at 8:50 a.m. and would end at 3:40 p.m. In addition, one of the things you may notice if you're looking at this, the actual times of the days for the elementary and the high school have changed, and I'll talk about that. But the elementary time of the day is about 10 minutes longer. The high school one is about 10 minutes shorter. Just so people have a sense of what that actually looks like in terms relative to current schedules, what I have here are your current times for these schools and then the proposed new times for these schools. One of the things that I'll talk about too, but one of the things that was important to us was to try to get these schools in line as much as possible, especially in the various levels. You'll actually notice if you're looking at the various different times. I think elementary, we found out there were 3 or 4 different start and end times amongst the schools, even amongst the schools that were actually scheduled at the same time. At the same time, the middle schools were and the high schools were both fairly well aligned, although over the years, randomly, there had been 1 minute added into Heim and 1 minute added into East. In terms of the high school student length of day, I wanted to mention, as I mentioned, it's kind of 10 minutes shorter. So the actual length of day is 10 minutes shorter. It really doesn't result in much of a reduction in the classroom time. Actually, south and north, there'll be no reduction in classroom time. Our periods are 42 minutes as they stand right now. That time will actually be garnered out of extra time that was in a couple of the periods. For instance, at South, we had a longer period. We used to do video homerooms, video announcements in homeroom. So we had a longer first period. So we're able to actually take that time out because we don't do the video announcements anymore. At North, there will be a little bit of a reduction for the same thing in the first period. Plus, they have some passing times that are 5 and some passing times that are 4. At the East length of periods is 43 minutes. So at East, it would be 1 minute out of each period in order to accomplish that. Just as a sample, this is sort of a sample bell schedule that we would look to do. The plan is, and I've spoken to the other high school principals, we would like to have our bell schedules all aligned. As it stands right now, they're not. The bell schedules are actually different at all 3 buildings. So what we're hopeful for is that with the bell schedules better aligned, that'll make it easier, certainly for our traveling teachers and also understanding the schedules. One of the things that was interesting with elementary start time, and we've gotten the question before, wouldn't it make sense to push everything back, move things much later? And actually, a lot of the research that is out there, and we talked to quite a few people down in Baltimore at the conference, indicate that there are actually some benefits for elementary students moving earlier. And I've even used Mr. Filipowski as the example. He has young kids. My kids are a little bit older. He has much younger kids. And I said, hey, isn't it fun when they're that young? And at, like 6:15 a.m., they're in your face awake. And that is one of the things you find is that the younger kids tend to be more attentive and they're actually ready for learning earlier in the day. It also allows those schools to maximize schedule opportunities, moving it into an earlier day. They found, the research has shown that there are no negative academic effects from moving elementary students earlier, while there actually are significant academic benefits for moving high school kids later. And actually, one of the other pieces that could be a potential benefit is a decreased need for morning childcare and fewer transitions for students. We wanted to mention, I mentioned the fact that the elementary length of day, we talked about that it would be 10 minutes more. Actually, that wasn't part of our committee's charge, but concurrently at the same time, I know there was a discussion amongst district leadership about adding possible time into that day. And so we are presenting that here as part of it, because it does make sense to, if we're going to do this, to kind of put it all together. So concurrently, that was a discussion that was happening, and we were able to bring it into our presentation. One of the things that was very important as we discussed it, and Dr. Brown Hall agreed and was adamant, was and it is a concern that we actually saw in the research, that if you move elementary to an earlier time, what you're actually talking about are elementary kids potentially waiting outside earlier. I know, at least for my school, we have bus pickups as early as 6:35. We didn't feel like that was something that we wanted to have for the elementary kids. So one of the pieces, one of those parameters that I talk about as you're going through and you're figuring out the puzzle of school start times and going through there, was actually making sure that no elementary students were going to be picked up before 7 a.m. And so that was one of the pieces that we were able to work with our transportation department as we were figuring out all these pieces. So there will not be any pickups for elementary students prior to 7 a.m. 7 a.m. would be the earliest pickup time for an elementary student. Another piece that was mentioned to us, and the committee was very, very adamant that we make sure we explore this too, is what changes this might bring in before and after school care. And obviously, given the change, you're moving elementary earlier. So what does that mean? Probably means you're going to need more after school care as opposed to the morning care, although we still might need some morning care, especially with the 2 schools that are going to go later. So we did actually go through a process. I know Dr. Brown Hall worked with this process too, of calling all the different, as some people may know, we actually have buses that do drop off at after-school care programs. We also have Just for Kids in our buildings. So we have spoken to multiple, over a dozen after-school care programs and different programs about whether or not they would be able to accommodate any changes that we were going to make in those situations, with an overwhelming response of absolutely, we're ready to accommodate those things, even so much as we can open up a new room in this place. We have a room that's available for it. But we do know that Just for Kids will also be something that, as we explore, they have indicated a positive response to us for the ability to fill any needs that we have for that, in terms of using Just for Kids in the afternoon. And I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Muchika for the athletics piece.
Thank you, Mr. Borbin. A couple things quickly about athletics. The reason that I was on the panel was to see what times work for us in athletics and intramurals. So as you can see from the first slide, while these programs will obviously start a little bit later, the changes will not affect athletic offerings or extracurricular offerings. There will be limited light outdoor games. I think of things like golf and bowling and ice hockey where we don't control the venues. We've already started conversations with those groups to make sure that we have all the offerings that we have currently for all 3 schools. A later dismissal, a good positive for this is that we have a lot less unstructured time. For those of you that don't know, a 2:45 dismissal for a team that starts at 4 p.m. because their coach works in the private sector or they work at a middle school. We've had an hour and 15 minutes where we've had to come up with creative ways to have those kids stay out of trouble, so to speak. So it's one thing that we're really looking forward to. And the next slide, athletic busing. Actually, with this proposal, the busing will be better for our students in 7th through 12th grade. The biggest number of ridership is from our elementary schools, followed by middle and then high. This will free up bus runs at 3:45. Currently, the earliest bus we can get for any sport is 4 p.m., which is why most of our start times are 5 p.m., 6 p.m., 7 p.m. So this will free up bus times earlier. In addition to that, we've had a lot of requests over the last couple of years since COVID to have sports shuttles at the middle level, which we're looking into. This will allow the kiddos from Casey to go over to Heim, Heim to Casey, Mill on to South, because we will have more buses available. And middle school intramurals, I've already been in talks with our phys ed staff, both middle and elementary school. We will still have the same robust offering of all of our intramurals. We will get creative with the before school schedule and have intramurals after school as well.
One of the questions that came up, and certainly as a high school principal was important to me, was making sure that we still have students who can access the BOCES, the Harkness program that we have. And this is one of the areas where it does become a little bit interesting. And really, it's the morning Harkness program. The morning Harkness program starts at 8 a.m. We did consult. Clarence currently has an 8:52 start time, Clarence High School. So we did ask them, how do you do this? And it will mean that those kids will actually start a little bit earlier. They'll have to be at Harkness at 8 o'clock. We still are responsible for the transportation, making sure that those students have the ability to get there. It will not cancel any programs, though. The students will still have access to those programs. Really, the middle school, the midday run really doesn't have much effect at all. And the end of the day run is something else that we're looking at. It will mean, I know for South and possibly we're looking at it for the other buildings. Whereas right now we actually, the last run, so the end of day Harkness, we call it PM Harkness. When the PM Harkness comes back, that's actually at the end of our school day. That actually wouldn't be true now. They would actually be coming back and there would be a 9th period class after that. So they would have the ability to be in a class at that point. Some of our students in those situations have early release, but they'd have that opportunity to continue to do that. The one thing we wanted to make sure too, and I know that when this was released on board docs today, there were a few questions. I was out of the building on a field trip today and I came back and this was one of the big questions was before school activities. And as we said, while some high schools already have before our school activities, my school definitely, we have multiple things that actually, even with a 7:45 start, we have things starting at 7 a.m. sometimes. And while we already have them, we do want to make sure that we make efforts to honor what we're doing here, which is honoring the fact that moving school start time later is something that we feel is important because the students are getting more sleep. And so, of course, some of the people who have morning activities already are like, so we can't have any morning activities. That is not what we're saying. In fact, I would guess that we'll probably have a slight increase in morning activities based on the 8:50 start time. Really what we were saying with this was, and it was something that was expressed even by a couple of our teachers and parents, was that if you do this, what we don't want to see is everything that used to be after school gets moved before school, and then you really haven't accomplished anything by doing that. And so when we say efforts will be made to limit those activities, we're going to be monitoring that. We want to make sure that, like I said, we are honoring what we've done here and honoring what the research has told us. And I know that the 6 of us who went to the conference, obviously when you're immersed in something for several days, you kind of go into that. As we sat there and we listened to the stories of the people talking about these things and talking about the benefits that they've seen and what it does and what you can actually accomplish with those things, we became more and more confident in our need to do this as we were going through. And we want to make sure we honor that and we aren't just simply pushing a problem to the morning. And that brings us to the end of our school start time presentation, and we'd be happy to answer any questions that people have.
Well, first, let me say thank you very much for that thorough presentation. Thank you very much. And I want to thank everyone that is listed on the school start time committee for all of the work and the time that was put into this, all of the questions they asked, because that really pushed the thinking. So that was very important. But I do want to make clear, and Principal Boardman said it in the presentation, the addition of time at the elementary level did not come out of the school start time recommendations. That is a district initiative that we have been looking at. It just happens that during this time, it will fit well in the transportation schedule. So thank you for bringing that up also, Principal Boardman. So are there questions, board members, for the committee that's presenting?
No, Mike was first. If it's whoever you call on, President.
Thanks for the presentation. It was very thorough. I guess I just had a couple questions. Repeatedly, it was said during the presentation, adolescent, middle school, and high schoolers it benefits. Yet I'm seeing the middle school times decrease. They're getting up earlier when in studies do show, and I have researched this, that that's actually the most critical age, especially in terms of behavioral development. And that's a concern of mine. Looking at these times. Hopefully that was researched. I also researched and talked to some people, including some school districts in Canada that have looked at that. Some studies show that a lot of these that have been in these studies, they academically were lower achieving school districts, which it shows a higher gap to achieve this. What we see is academic progress. Not to say that all studies are bad. I do believe in the science. I'm not discerning that, but that would be another concern of mine if I'm thinking out loud, looking at the time changes. Because a lot of the studies look at lower income, lower performing schools where they have that gap, again, like I said, to improve. Those are just a couple areas of concerns. Another area of concern in terms of bus pickup times, I appreciate the 7 o'clock thing or 7 a.m. Pickup, that it won't be before that. But a concern of mine is a safety concern. As you know, some elementary students have to be picked up at corners. Some of these places are cul-de-sacs. They don't have sidewalks, and that's a concern of mine in daylight savings time. It's still dark at 7 a.m. It's a safety concern of mine as I think through this and process it in my head. The only reason I bring up these concerns is I like people to hear as a board member where my thoughts are before decisions are made and voted on. There's always positives and negatives to everything. Those are just some concerns. And I didn't know if maybe some of those things came up in some of your studies, or if you saw some of those or had answers to those concerns that I had, which would help me, better understand it.
Yeah. I mean, all of those things have come up and, I think, certainly what you're trying to do is address them as best you can. When we were in Baltimore, one of the things that was provided to us was actually a list. I want to say it was 53 different districts. And so we spent a lot of time examining other districts and what the benefits are. I think, overwhelmingly, while you're right in terms of some of the academic achievement pieces, they may have happened. Overwhelmingly, though, the research itself in terms of the health benefits, and I want to say, I mean, the school start time conference that we went to focused quite a bit on that, and really, while the academic achievements, I mean, there were other things in there. For instance, one of the things that they talked about down there that we didn't include in ours was, one of the districts had actually seen. They did a 2-year examination of sports and athletic injuries and found that when they changed it, they saw a reduction in that. Whether or not that's actually, a cause and effect, that's tough for us to say. They certainly believe that. I think one of the things that we really focused on was the health and mental health benefits. And it does say adolescent. What was very clear down there, though, was it's a sliding scale. Just like elementary can move earlier, you certainly want to have middle schools especially as you're looking at it, as late as possible. What's interesting about Williamsville is our middle schools are 5 through 8. So you're really actually seeing an elementary and a middle school level, in terms of other places. And so we have that sort of split piece for that. But what the research is pretty clear on is that the kids who benefit the most from late school start times are the high school. And in high school, they were talking about traditional 9 through 12 high school. That's where the research is focused on. The 5 through 8, you're right, especially the 7 and 8 kids would benefit from it. One of the things that we actually did as we first started this, and this is where logistics gets into some of those pieces, is we really looked at 8:30, and I think you saw that in the slide that Christine Harding presented. We looked at 8:30, which is what most of the research will talk about as the time we want to get our high school and middle school kids as close to as possible. And really, that's where we kind of started. In fact, I think our first sort of thing as we were playing with things was an 8:30 to 3:30 8:30 to 3:30 for the high schools. Then you start getting into, well, okay, how long do you need between bus runs, and what does this look like? Well, if we start high school at 8:30 and it's 30 minutes between bus runs, that's now elementary starting at 7:30. That doesn't seem doable. So now you start looking at figuring those things out. And so, yeah, we tried to get the middle school as close to that 8:30 mark as possible.
Can I bring up two things, if I may? So I also want to stress, because we know that what we've seen over the many years is a increased need for mental health supports in our school buildings. And the research was clear that the movement of times really helps with mental health supports for students. I also want to talk, because I appreciate what Mr. Biscaglia said. That's why we were so adamant that no student will be picked up before 7 a.m. We are also, what we failed to mention, implementing a transportation efficiency study. So what we haven't done in the past was send notice to families to see who really needs transportation. What we do is we develop bus routes for all of our students. And many times that's inefficient. That's why we have high school buses arriving to high school so early, because we've routed a bus for 75 students in 12 ride, right? And so it leaves a lot of inefficient time. So with us surveying our parents, and we will be doing that in April and May, of who really needs transportation, it allows us to make more efficient bus routes. So it will reduce the amount of time we need in the morning. But right now, saying that no student will be picked up earlier than 7 o'clock helps us. That may eventually be 7:10, 7:15, depending on how many students really need transportation. When you drive by any of our schools in the morning or at dismissal, you see the line of cars that are lined up, dropping off and picking up kids. We need to understand what that looks like and how it will affect the transportation need of our district, because that will also affect those morning times, probably pushing the elementary pickup times to later. So thank you for that point.
If I can, I just want to acknowledge the board member's comment about, and agree with, there is a disproportionate impact on economically disadvantaged students. So those studies will definitely show that. Conversely, making these changes, those impacts increase those proportionally more. The magnitude of change for those students is significantly more.
Mm-hmm.
One of the key studies that we learned about in Baltimore, Cherry Creek School District in Colorado. It's a good one. I worked in it in the early 2000s. It's very similar to Williamsville, although it's 50,000 students, but demographic wise, it's one of the top performing suburban school districts in Denver. They were one of the case studies that we were learning about while we were in Baltimore. And it's a good example of kind of maintaining the high standards of a high quality, high performing school district, while also making certain adjustments to also support all the students throughout the district.
Thank you. Principal Manna? Board Member Manna.
I'll take the promotion. Thank you. Excellent work. I expect nothing less out of this district and the stakeholders that attended the meetings and had the input. And, what I'm struggling with is the feedback or pushback from families who are saying, I need my high school aged child to be home early for the middle school and elementary school child. I can't, it's too much it's too cumbersome to send my elementary or middle school to daycare for the hour and a half. Because right now the elementaries are, 2:10, 2:15 release, and maybe they'd be home for a half an hour before the high schoolers come home. Now it's an hour and 40 minutes. Quite a difference having an elementary student home waiting until the high school sibling comes home. And I would say that's probably the number one concern or complaint I'm getting, that you're really going to mess up my daycare situation. And I don't know if I have a question yet, but it seems to me that I have to wrestle with, how are we giving a positive impact to the 3 high schools, and what is the negative impact to the 10 other schools and the families who have children in those schools? So maybe my question is, what feedback did you get, or what experience did you hear about from either the conference or I think Cherry Creek you mentioned? Can you tell me? Because the science is irrefutable, basically.
Yeah.
No one here is going to say those. I mean, I am not going to say that those studies were fake or skewed. It's, how does this house of cards work for every family in this district? So my question would be, what was the feedback or information you received?
Yeah, and we've had those conversations also. And right now, there's actually some of the elementary schools get home before the high schools currently. And you're right, it would be, it would be a longer time there. And I think one of the things that is one of the things that we looked at. It's one of the reasons certainly why we were looking at after school care and what that could look like and what the need for that would be. I think the most difficult piece of that is, and it goes along with one of the things I had some of my teachers say, well, why didn't you take a poll and ask people what they wanted? And my response was, well, because if you take a poll and you ask people what they want, it's not based on that research. It's based on, well, what is my situation here? And I get that, and I think that's one of the things that's difficult. It's one of the things that anybody who's having a change is going to struggle with. I think, for us, one of the reasons why we really wanted to reach out to those after school care programs and look at those and make sure that those things were there is because it isn't acknowledging, hey, is there something there? It's acknowledging the fact that there will probably be changes for some people. I can tell you, I've had teachers who have known that that high school was probably going to go later, who looked at me and were like, "That's great. That fits my life perfectly." And we'll have families like that. And I have teachers who are like, "Ooh, my situation is going to be different. I'm going to have to figure that out." And I think that is the difficult piece of it as you're going through. And I wouldn't characterize it as the high schools are benefiting and the other 10 aren't. I actually think that there's a lot of benefits for all of the levels. Certainly, you do know that the research shows in terms of the high school kids, they're benefiting. I think when you're looking at the overall picture, but anytime you're making a change like this, you're going to be looking at, depending on your own situation, what does that look like? And that was why even with our committee when we started, I can tell you, for absolute certain, there was a member on the committee who looked at me before all this and said, I don't want to change anything. And that's why we asked everybody to really look carefully at the research and what is best for students. We're talking about almost 10,000 students and what is going to be best for those students as they're doing it. And it's why a lot of those pieces that we put in there came from questions that we all had as we worked through the work on the committee, saying like, well, what about this? This could be a problem. One of the things we tried to do was examine as many problems as we could find, and how could we ensure that those problems weren't as big a problem as we possibly could.
I would just add that there's going to be pluses and minuses to either way we look at that problem. For some, I know some families and parents approached me and said, great, now I can get to work on time a little bit more earlier in the morning, and my older child can get my kid on the bus. Not that we're recommending our high school students are up at 6
Waking
a.m.
up
getting their
anyways,
kids on the
yeah.
bus because that defeats the purpose of them sleeping. However, there is an element of some of our families too acknowledging the fact they're looking forward to getting to work, and it's shifting their daycare needs primarily to the afternoon. It's not going away, but there is definitely going to be some shifting for some families.
Thank you.
I just have another comment that I have heard, and I'm just wondering if this was brought up or anybody thought about it too. A lot of kids have mentioned they have after school jobs, and they're very worried now. How are they going to get there at 4 o'clock, or how are they going to fit athletics and this, or clubs and this?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we looked at that a lot, and one of the conversations I had, even with a group of my students, when they were talking about it, and I think some of this is it becomes perspective, right? I had a group of students who said, well, no jobs start later than 3:30, and I said, well, that's an interesting one because Clarence doesn't end until 3:30 right now. So do none of the kids in Clarence have jobs? Is that what we think? There will be some adjustment for that. Now, I will say for the high schools, we still would have early release, which all 3 high schools have. So there still would be that ability for students, even though the day may end now at 3:40. You would actually have for students, you would have the ability for them to leave early. I fully expect, and I've even talked about it to my counselors who are seeing that there's been an increase in seniors asking for not having 9th period classes. That's not a surprise to me at all. Even now, currently, with a 2:45 end, that tends to be one of the things. We have more students right now who ask for early release than ask for late arrival at South High School. I don't know what North and East is, but at South that's true. So I certainly would. I think that probably will be something. But again, I sometimes go back to there will be adjustments being made, but I know that kids from Clarence are working. And their day is going to end about the same time as ours. And so it can be done, but certainly part of that is making sure that the community is aware of what's happening and what this looks like also.
And just one more question about athletics. This has come up too, is that right now I can only speak for North. I don't know about the other schools, but there's a huge struggle to get time. There's so many people that need to practice, and there has to be some creative. So now what happens?
Yeah, that creativity piece. And I'll go back and say I wasn't invited to Baltimore, and I don't hold it against this group, but I was not at the conference in Baltimore. But we will have to get creative. We will. Middle schools will have to become more available to us, and we've talked with some of the principals about that. We do expect to use our grass again out front at North, for example. The winter will be a challenge, but it's a challenge that we're willing to take if the research and the committee and the people, if this is something that they do want. But it will be a challenge for sure.
Sorry, one more question. And now are there different people, I don't know, like different outside sports teams that rent space or lease space?
Sure.
So what happens with that? Then they just won't be able to?
No, we're going to lease space probably a little bit later, like our bowling groups, our hockey groups. We have hockey practices anywhere from 3 o'clock now, which will become 4:15. We have games at 6 o'clock at night, 8 o'clock at night, 9 o'clock at night. We'll still do that. Bowling, we have 4 o'clock to 6 o'clock rentals. Golf courses, we're in a fight time, yes, but we'll work with the golf courses on that, venues that we can't control. But yes.
Do you mean outside groups renting our spaces? So during the school year, outside group rental is pretty limited because quite honestly, we use our during the school year,
Right.
we use our time. So it's really rare for outside groups to do it. We do have some in the winter in particular with some gyms and things like that. And so you may see a little bit of that. I think, and even we've actually spoken, one of the things that we've been looking at is, so for instance, South is one of the schools when I think of late fall, early spring, South is one of the schools that I think could be more adversely affected than possibly North or East. North or East actually have lighted fields that are larger as opposed to South, which has the singular field. So one of the things we've already begun talking about, I spoke to Chris about it. I was speaking with Adam Erickson when he was here, are there other avenues for us if we need them? ECC's in the process of potentially, building a field. That's an option for us. Damon is in the process of building lighted turf fields. That would be an option. I don't know how much we would need to, and that is part of this process. Is some of this will be us discovering that as we go through. What does it look like in terms of sharing space? Are we going to have to be more economical with that? I think we probably are, and I think those are things that you will probably look at. But it was interesting because one of the things we were very concerned about initially when you talk about sports was, well, now buses are going to have to leave that much later. I think we were all looking at it as it's 2:45. We get out right now. It's 4 o'clock. If we get out at 3:40, now we're looking at 5 o'clock before buses can leave. And we actually think it's possible that buses will leave earlier now for away matches than they currently do, even though the school day is 55 minutes later.
Dr. Singh?
I just want to thank the committee for all the hard work and research. In your conference meetings, was there any question of how the students adapted to the new time change? And how much time did it take in case where you had improvement in mental health and improvement in grades? Did it happen first year, second year after the time change, or was there any discussion on that?
So it wasn't discussion. So some of the research, most of the studies were done fairly quickly after the changes were made. And then there were some longer term ones. Certainly, one of the things that was apparent was when you make the change, the sleep begins to change almost automatically because of the way that it actually works. So I think Dan mentioned it in his slide. For every 2 minutes you adjust the time, they tend to gain about 1 to 2 minutes. They actually said it's closer to 1.5 to 2 minutes of time that you're going to gain in terms of sleep. So those sleep factors are you're going to see those on a sort of automatic basis. There really wasn't anything that talked about the time frame in terms of academics, but a lot of the discussions in terms of the benefits, in terms of mental health and other things, really went along with the academic results. So I would assume, without seeing that actual piece, that you're seeing some immediate reactions for those things.
And we are setting up time for some of our students to visit Alden High School because they did that move a couple of years ago, just so that our students can have conversations with those students. And we're also setting up time for some of our students to meet with students at Clarence to get some of their student questions answered about jobs, about extracurriculars, because Clarence starts a little bit later than even our proposal.
Go ahead. No, I went first.
Mr. Bueller?
I just have two things. As a person who just went through this in the place I work in, I was against it there, and I almost don't notice it anymore. And I'm also a golf coach where I work. In the 5 years the few years we've done CFJ, I've never lost a match because of darkness, and we do travel. I guess my question is there any research that goes against what you're saying? Did you find any credible research that said, no, you're doing the wrong thing by moving times back?
Not as it relates to the medical field, which is a lot of what our conference was about. So physiologically, talking about what students need when it talks about sleep deprivation and what students need with their circadian rhythms as they move into adolescence. The science is pretty clear. Logistics, there's things that school districts have to manage and deal with. So the only negatives have more been case study stories about school districts' inability to maybe attend to some of the logistics, transportation, daycare, things that are unique to their environment or their locality.
I just love that. I'm sorry. Do we have any idea what percentage of our students have jobs after school? Is it I was talking about it with another board member earlier. Is it 3%? Is it 28%? Do we have any idea?
We don't.
I don't. I would say this. I don't believe it's 3%. It's higher than that.
I'm just curious. That's a concern that my phone's been popping off throughout this meeting, and that's one of the concerns I seem to be getting. But how many kids are we talking about? That's, legitimate question.
I think a lot.
I'm sure,
I don't know.
but I'm sure employers will adapt, right? The need for employees is out there. They're not going to say no because you can't be here 15 minutes earlier. I don't need you. We're being very flexible in district with how we hire, right? So I think it goes back to what Principal Bortman said earlier. This is a change. And one of my colleagues said it best yesterday. We were in another meeting. Change is never easy, but we learn how to do hard better, right? So it's about making sure the community knows what we're doing and they will also help us adapt. Because there are other districts looking at us statewide, just like very similar. We looked at Olean, we looked at Alden, we looked at districts that have made this change and how they went about it. We looked at districts outside of the state, and people will also be looking at us about how we do it.
Yeah, and I think having spoken to high school kids, having high school kids of my own, I think employers are already flexible. I know when both of my sons, when they would play in their sports seasons, they wouldn't work. And then when their sports season ended, they'd go back to work. And so I know there is flexibility. Certainly this would be a change for them though.
Board member Biscaglia.
I'll be a principal. Can I take this too? With my comments before, I do want to say I agree with what Mr. Manna said, and I understand the studies, and I don't want to, you guys did a fabulous job. I don't want to take that away with my concerns of what I brought up. I just try to think out loud of all concerns that, many people have. And as we were discussing this, I came up with two other questions. One is, it affect the budget with transportation?
It does.
That's that.
Yep, it will.
Just to follow up, when just to clarify too, when you talk about the opportunity for those shuttle buses, I want to make clear that's just we're not guaranteeing it's going to happen.
Correct.
That was good.
That's
My
correct.
second one, so thanks.
But absolutely. But when we spoke with transportation, it is more likely because we will have the ability, because the middle schools ending early, and many of the middle school buses, for example, that service Mill also service South, right?
Question of cost.
It's a question of the timing and the cost, but it looks like it's more in line with what we need to have happen to be able to have those shuttle buses. And as far as cost, I know that Mr. Kelly gave us preliminary estimates of around $650,000, realizing that 64% of that is reimbursable transportation aid. But that's why the efficiency surveys that we send out are so important, because if we reduce our ridership, and we know that, we can reduce our bus routes also, because this will add some bus routes, but we're able to reduce those when we realize how many students are on the bus. If we route 75 to 90 students and only 12 are riding, there's opportunity there for sure.
Yeah, and again, that's another, just talking about how the Rockefeller Center or study and all that. That's a fear of mine. What's going to change with foundation, and another a concern. I won't say it's not a lot of things came up. Problems would have been with districts that have logistic issues, and then years later they find out that A, B, and C is happening. I guess I'm not saying this change is bad or doesn't need to happen. It just seems like it's happening very, very quick, not thinking of every single logistic thing. Small little fears of mine. That's all I'll just say.
And I share the story of
Nothing
one
to do with the studies either. I don't want to.
It's funny because one of my buddies at the gym came up to me. He's a parent at Williamsville East, and he said, "My son tells me you guys are thinking about changing the studies." I'm like, "Where have you been the last year and a half?" Because this is something that we've been discussing for a year and a half. So I don't want anyone to think that this is something we're rushing into. We haven't provided enough time to study it and explore all of the logistics about it. But we do realize also that no matter how much planning, how much study you do, a lot of logistics are answered once you get into the process. And we have to reserve time for that. And we have to reserve ourselves to understand that that may happen also. And so I just ask, board members and the public to understand that.
I agree. And I ask those things for responses like that. And I think
Absolutely.
it's good to think that way. And just, as Mr. Manna said, in terms, I did have one individual come up. They were in tears talking to my wife at Wegmans. And I think as we grow in diversity in the district, in general, there are tiers where I can't afford childcare anyways. I don't know what I'll do if this happens. And I'm a teacher. I want to see every kid be successful and academics to grow. I totally agree with that. I get it. It's just, that's where I struggle. And I want to say because I'm an individual board member. That's where I struggle when you have that as we're changing, it's hard. It's a hard decision because you guys are 100% accurate there's plenty of positives. There are great things that can, are the outcomes, but then you get those small little stories and negatives and you kind of makes you pull back just a little. You know what I mean?
Right. No, and I completely understand that. I completely get it because, even during the time when I was finishing my dissertation at UB, one of the questions kept coming up, and I know board members have mentioned it before also. When we know what's in the best interest of students, when we know when studies are done and there's clear evidence what will benefit students, why does it take so long for K-12 to adopt or adapt when we know what's in the best interest of kids? And so we have to start to understand that. I know our board has been very strong with supporting what's in the best interest of kids. Look at our class size initiatives, right? Our board many years ago adopted class size guidelines, and there's definitely not as much research supporting that as there is supporting this. And we were the leader in that, right? So we understand that we have to sometimes make sure we keep the focus on what's in the best interest of kids, according to the research, according to what we know is in the best interest of kids. And I appreciate all the questions, and there'll always be questions, there'll always be anecdotes, but we have to eventually look at, this is the research, this is what we know is in the best interest of kids. Are we ready to make that commitment for our students?
Yeah, and I will say right after the Channel 7 story, I think it was, or the Buffalo News, they came out at the same time, whenever they were I must have been October. I spoke to a district administrator from another district, and the comment that was sort of made was, look, we all know this research is there and we all know it's better for kids, but it's a lot easier not to do this. It strikes me that it is. I sort of joked with people. I'm like, I have 4.5 years till I'm eligible to retire. It's a lot easier for me not to do this and just ride off. I don't know if that's what's right though, and I think anybody who really looks at that research knows, geez, this is the right thing to do. But what is difficult is when you have 13 buildings and you have however many employees, 2,000, 3,000 employees, and 10,000 kids and all those families. Yes, this is going to, I sort of joke, it's like a lot of decisions we make at the building level, where we do something and it's the curve. You're going to have 20% of the people who absolutely hated that decision, 20% of the people who absolutely loved that decision, and the 60% in the middle could sway either way. And I think that is true. There's no doubt that this is a difficult decision.
I just wanted to highlight one point about the research. Just looking at all of our research articles, these date back to 2014, 2017. So although we've been exploring this for the past year and a half, this research is old, right? We are catching up now to that research, to that information that existed for all these years. So I just wanted to highlight that point.
Thank you. Vice President Poulin?
Yeah, I haven't wanted to comment because I did have the opportunity to go to Baltimore and get immersed in the soup, as they say. But I know as a board member, this is my 4th year on the board. This is the first year, because we were taking action, that I haven't gotten emails from students and families saying, when is the school district going to look at doing things to make this more, change the start time of school? It's too early. So that's been on my mind for the years that I have been on the board. We've heard it at community forums when we've had parents speak to us about that. And I am an educator at heart. I've been in education for a long time and have been hearing about this. My grandson, who graduated last year, and his friend said, why didn't you do this when we were in school? I said, it takes time. It takes time. But I'm also thinking about our community, and we are asking some hard changes for people. And I look at the community also and think, for a third of the people in our community, it's not going to be a change, because our middle schoolers who are moving into high school, they're going to be virtually starting at the same time that they have been. So that's not new to them. For our fourth graders who are moving into our middle school, they're going to be starting at virtually the same time. And for our kindergartners who are coming in, it's all new. So we have some newness there to build on as well. I'm very hopeful, and I'm anxious to hear from the community their concerns so that we can address them and hopefully do what's best for our kids. I also, early on in my career here as a board member, we started hearing so much about student mental health. And I raised the question, what is it we are doing as a school district to create a situation that is causing mental health problems for our students? And one of those things is the time that we start high school. So I'm glad that we have come to this point, and hope we can work through the logistics that we need to make this a good situation for all of our students.
And I think it's fair to say that although we've kind of lived this the last year and a half, we're glad that you guys have to make the decision.
Thank you very much. Thank you for all of your work, and thank you for your phenomenal presentation and answering the questions tonight. We greatly appreciate it. Thank you very much.
So much.